Hello and welcome. We're talking tonight about a topic that I think will hit home for a lot of you. We're talking about when relationships, committed relationships, start to drift apart. And you may say, oh, that happened to me, or I have family members that went through that. I've worked with couples who have gone through that, of course, as a social worker. And I think it's very, very, very common. In fact, my guest tonight will probably say it happens to most couples. My guest is John Driggs. John is the well-known psychotherapist in private practice here in the Twin Cities, St. Paul based. I first came across John when I read his columns in the Phoenix. The Phoenix Spirit is a newsletter that comes out every month. And I look for that magazine every month, or newsletter, so I can read John's columns, because I have found that they are so full of wisdom and good practical advice and insights. So I'm delighted he could be back tonight and talk more about this topic. So welcome, John.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the compliments, and I really feel it's an honor to talk with you about this topic.
Well, it's certainly a tricky thing for most couples that experience it. Do you think, am I right, do most relationships that are committed go through a drifting period?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, there's a lot of low periods in any good relationship.
Sort of ups and downs.
Yeah, ups and downs. For example, after the first child is born in a relationship, parents typically report, about 2/3 of parents report that their emotional connection is less meaningful to them, that actually most of the energy is going into raising the baby and losing sleep and having to deal with financial problems and those kind of things. So that's an example. That's an example. There are periods in any relationship. Maybe someone, maybe you're having a difference in the direction of your lives, and that you're just not able to reconcile that with the partner for a period of time.
Together.
Somebody wants to go back to school, and the other person doesn't want that. So you have to kind of tolerate a certain disconnect, And there's normal things, health issues that cause people to emotionally disconnect, those kind of things.
Going back to the first baby, I often think when couples get pregnant, they're so happy and they're so excited. Exactly. And yet those of us who have seen a lot of relationships know that it might end up being a hard time for them after the child is born. Is there any way couples can reduce the chance, John, of having that drifting after the baby?
Well, it's a good question. Because most of the time in couples, we get fascinated by some aspect of our lives, but it's usually outside the primary relationship. We forget about dating night. We forget about that we were friends to begin with. We forget about the delights of just spending time with a partner. Instead, we're focusing on other family members, expectations of parents they put on themselves, or other family members outside the family, those kind of things. And what happens to people when this happens, one of these transitions into parenthood, is that people have a tendency to turn into roles rather than people. So they may start off having some personal connection, because a baby winds up tripling the relationships in the family. And then every kid is born, there's a multiplication of all these relationships. So it's easy to get lost in this larger context,
So even just knowing that this will or can happen can help.
Exactly, because you can become
some of the degree of drifting, I would think.
You can become more mindful of it. Like, we probably need a babysitter. We probably need support from other family members. Maybe if we had some time for ourselves, like quote unquote a date night, or some time to take a walk. They always say that it takes a village to raise a child, and part of that is because we want to preserve the basic friendship between the partners. And I think a lot of times people wind up not doing that. They just don't attend to it.
I remember in my first marriage, we lived way out on the West Coast in Oregon and Washington, and we were on a tight budget and didn't get a babysitter very often. And
Yeah.
I look back on that and I think that marriage ended in divorce, and I think we maybe made a really big error there in not fostering that couple relationship
And it's
more.
a lot, it's a lot of expectations a mother puts on herself. She feels the pressure of being a good mother. So it's almost like she gets lost in her own expectations. Fathers too have expectations about financially providing. And so they get really busy with their work lives, when children are born. And mothers with all the parenting duties and those kind of things.
What are a couple of the other top 2 or 3 times that you think marriages can drift or go through hard times?
I think it's interesting because, when people are married, there's a conscious marriage, and one thing that we're aware of, a conscious relationship. We're both aware of kind of the usual patterns, like if he doesn't get his way, well, then she tries to make him feel better, and then she gets frustrated because he's not, so then she takes it personally. And there's like a little dance, there's a conscious dance between the couple. They both know
Back
it,
and forth.
they know it, it's like a familiar dance. That's the conscious part of the relationship. There's an unconscious, part though, that's even more important. And I can give you an example, let's say, you decide to marry somebody who's unlike, a woman decides to marry somebody who's unlike her parents or her mother or her father. And so if she grew up
Who is unlike.
Yeah, who's unlike.
I don't want to marry someone like
I don't want to
my
marry somebody
dad
like that.
or my mother.
So if she grew up with a lot of emotional distance in her family, like people just didn't ask her questions about herself, weren't particularly interested. They gave her the basics, but they didn't really get that interested in her. Then when she grows up, she might want to marry somebody who is real enthusiastic with her and has a life of his own, maybe a peppy guy. And then, so she enjoys that throughout the courtship because she feels like, oh, this is really different. That's the conscious part of the marriage. And usually about the first 6 months, their sexual relationship is dynamic. And because of the hormones with sex and neurochemicals of early sexual attraction, really glues a couple together. So they look forward to this future that's different from what they grew up with. What happens though is the marriage happens. When marriages happen, when people commit themselves to each other, that's a dramatic change. The unconscious part of their relationship starts emerging because it's all connected to how their families ran their families and those things, and then they start reenacting that. So what might happen then is the guy who is really a go-getter and really alive, he might wind up taking all that energy outside the family and having lots of friends and social life. And so sure enough, she has somebody who has a lot of pep, in her life, but he's not directing it at her. So actually what happens is she winds up repeating the emotional neglect that she grew up with. There's an unconscious thing.
Just with a different
twist.
Different twist.
Exactly.
So drifting can start almost right away after the sexual honeymoon period is over.
Definitely. The biggest thing, what happens, the thing that prompts the drifting is that people are not emotionally checking in with each other. They don't check in. They don't ask, how is this going for you? This is how it's going for me. How are we doing? They don't have those talks.
Maybe they're afraid to.
Exactly. They're either afraid to feel things or they're afraid that the results will not be good, and then they'll have to deal with something they don't know how to deal with.
That's a good point,
really, it's really the beginning of avoidance is what is the kiss of death for the beginning of the end for the relationship. It actually starts fairly soon.
So not talking about the hard things
Exactly.
or the feelings that maybe aren't all positive.
Aren't all positive, or
So you're
even
stuffing-
some of the interest in a partner. Not talking about that. And
not supporting the interest, perhaps.
Exactly. When I see couples, unfortunately, I see them 20 years after that. And they come in
drifted
to my
for a long time.
So they are like at death's door as a couple. They're like one step from the divorce attorney, and they expect me to be like Jesus, making Lazarus come from the dead. Unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And unfortunately, a lot of those couples do wind up divorcing. They'll say things like, I wish we saw you 20 years ago. Because the interesting part is that a lot of drifting couples the partners do love each other. They're just scared to admit it. They're actually scared to acknowledge their feelings for each other.
Why would that be? I mean, that's kind of counterintuitive sounding, that they're
funny?
Afraid to say how much they care.
You mean something to me. You mean something to me.
That makes them feel too vulnerable,
Too vulnerable.
You think?
Well, what happens is if you admit that you mean something to me, then you could react badly to that, or I could wind up feeling how important you are, and then I could wind up feeling like I have to run away.
Because I don't want to feel that responsible,
or the risk of being rejected too. See, people sometimes they get scared of good things. That's one of
too much of a good
thing, and too much closeness, too much good stuff.
Would that be more particularly the case for someone who grew up in a family where they didn't get a lot of intimacy?
They don't want to repeat that again. So if I don't get my hopes up in the relationship, if I don't really look at all the good stuff, then I'm not going to lose that much. It's kind of like put their head in the sand. It won't hurt as much. So they take this better.
So they don't want to show how much they care.
Exactly, better safe than sorry approach to relationships.
That's so interesting.
And then this goes on forever. The other part that's interesting is they also don't want to separate too, because they're too scared to face the horrors of losing somebody.
Being on their
so
own.
They tend to stay together in this limbo forever, droning on, not being strangers to each other, and feeling extremely empty and void and discouraged. And then they unfortunately get into symptom behavior, like addictions, affairs, alcoholism, sports addiction, stuff like that. Yeah.
And I hear that affairs are often based more on a need for emotional intimacy than physical excitement.
Exactly.
Is that
always the case?
You would agree?
Yeah, typically the case. It's funny when I work with people in couples like this. If you show one of the partners the least amount of interest, like what do you like to do for fun? What do you find meaningful in life? What turns you on in life? That person just like opens up, and it's like, oh, no one's ever asked me that. It's like they're almost like they're melting right in front of you because they appreciate it so much that anybody would show that to them.
Oh, that's
and of course they need to do that with each other, not with the counselor.
Sure.
But it kind of shows how deprived they are. I mean, you can feel the deprivation.
Do you think there are ways we can encourage newly married couples or newly committed couples to really have those hard talks right away? I mean, are there some guidelines as a therapist you could spell out for us now?
Well, I think for sure newly married couples have to remember that they're friends. These are friends. And getting back to basic kindness and respect for each other as friends.
Treat them like a best friend.
Yeah, that's right, despite all the conflicts. And, I think doing things like having time for each other that they don't have other people involved in, that kind of thing would be really good. Date night, that kind of thing. Doing things like taking walks, for example, even if you don't feel close to your partner, just the idea of going out and doing something that's fun or meaningful.
What about having a set time every week, John, where Sunday night you sit down and say, here's what's happening next week, and here are things that I think we need to talk more about that are on my, list here?
And also
or is
having
that too threatening for a lot of people?
Also having some goals together, like we're going to plan this nice vacation out of town. We're going to do this. What happens? People fall into ruts, with each other. They don't want to take the chance of having fun. I mean, I'm always amazed because I'm trying to get people to have fun, and it's so threatening for people to go out of town.
They've gotten used to their own routines.
Yeah, they like kind of boring routines.
Take me back or I want to ask you to go back when you said that sexual excitement wanes, you think, for couples after about 6 months.
6 months.
I thought, wow, that is earlier than I've heard or thought.
Well, what happens is there are just neurochemicals. I don't remember all the names, but endorphins and dopamine, those kind of things. They're the zip, the peppy part of sex, the passionate part, where we just can't wait to see our partner, think about them all the time, see them as the cat's meow and everything. And it's beautiful.
It's really a lovely time.
It's a lovely time.
Yeah, it is. Although you often can't get much done during that.
Yeah, and that's a great thing. It's a great start to a relationship, actually. And of course, about that time, after about 6 months, the actual neurochemicals start dwindling. And despite how much people wish they wouldn't, mostly because we get habituated to our partner, it becomes the same old thing. And the habituation, interestingly enough, is a good thing because it can lead into the next stage, which is more about closeness and intimacy.
So
the sexuality gets based on a more deeper feeling towards a partner. This is a time where another neurochemical called oxytocin comes into the brain. Oxytocin.
Okay.
And that's the one that makes you feel secure and good about being with a person. Just like with children, you can have oxytocin responses to holding a child. It makes you feel good about yourself and good to be with that person.
And so in some ways, I can see that would help the sexual relationship. If
Very
you're
much
feeling
so.
secure, loved, you can open up more to your partner.
Safely, exactly. And it's good for both people. Unfortunately, what happens to people is they don't do the intimacy part of the relationship very well, because usually about that time, they're probably close to marriage or thinking of marriage or getting married. And of course, every time a person gets married, all the demons from the past come up, all the unconscious demons. I guarantee you, if you get married, your brain has a memory of what your parents' marriage was like and how they related on both sides of the family, and then you start falling into those patterns with your partner, as much as you don't want to.
So
you do.
Our history continues on our shoulders, doesn't it?
Right.
I want to just, from your article, I want to just list a couple of the warning signs that things are drifting, John, and just have you comment on a couple of them.
Yeah.
Because there were so many interesting ones. You've talked about the emotional detachment, suppressing anger. I think that's a biggie.
Oh, big one. And they suppress good feelings and anger. And people become strangers to each other, polite strangers, interestingly. There's a kind of, people can, I admire my partner, she's so good at her work, or I admire my husband because he's great with the children. But they don't want to spend time with each other. They just admire each other that way. And they actually don't say that very much.
Things that are bothering them just get stopped.
And all the other things, It's like a false positiveness that people have, And they think, everything will work out, but then underneath there's this deep anger about what happens,
And they put on a pretty positive front, probably, too, to the neighbors.
Exactly. What people don't realize is that positive conflict is good for love.
Say that again, because I think people need to hear it.
Conflict is good for love, not destructive conflict. Famous psychologist John Gottman studied 20,000 couples over a period of 20 years. And he had all of his students look at the interactions between partners in a relationship. And he wanted to find out what helped people stay together and what destroyed the marriage. And what he found was that there are these, what he calls the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And
what are they? 1, 2, 3.
It's kind of fun. It's contempt, criticism, stonewalling, and there's one more. These are the things, I think it's like blaming.
Okay.
These are the kind of things that you do not want to do with a partner. And he said that if you do any of these things, you have to have, there's a ratio called a golden ratio, 5-to-1. So if you have some of these negative interactions, if they're more than 5 times the ratio to the positive reactions, like validating and affection, encouragement,
affirming,
that if the bad ones are 5 times greater than the negative ones, then your relationship is likely headed for divorce. Scientifically.
Would that be the case for any of those 4?
Yeah.
Contempt, blaming, stonewalling.
Right.
In other words, not showing your emotions.
Not showing emotions. Exactly.
And what was the 4th one?
I think it's blaming. I can't remember.
Yeah, you said blaming,
Yeah,
stonewalling.
criticism.
Oh, criticizing.
Yeah, criticizing.
Criticizing, that's a tricky one. Some people would say, well, I'm not criticizing, I'm just giving feedback.
Oh,
or,
yeah.
just telling you what I like.
Yeah,
it's tricky.
women who have critical expressions on their face towards their husband regularly in the first 4 years of marriage will likely face a divorce.
Really?
It's that powerful.
So
it's even the face.
Expression.
Yep. Isn't that funny how that works?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
So they're really destructive, these patterns. And that's what he found out. But what he found out also is that just fighting itself, it can actually be very positive for couples, that constructive fighting is really good. And that's not what hurts relationships. I'm always happy as a therapist to have people come in my office fighting like cats and dogs, blaming each other, calling each other names, and doing everything they can to say how much they hate each other. Because then I know we have some hope.
There's some emotion there.
Right. The worst thing is have people come in my office and it feels like you're at a funeral. And everything's dead and people are polite. It's really very sad, actually. It's hard to kind of get the embers.
One thing I thought about in relationship to this interview was that I think in relationships there is a fine line that if you have too much hard stuff going on, you get over that line, and to pull back and restore things to a good place, it's nigh impossible.
Well, that's why there's some level of avoidance is a good thing, that's for sure. And we all need that at times. We just need to kind of pull back and just kind of not get into heavy-duty stuff and just enjoy life,
And have fun
with
as
a partner.
couple.
Yeah, kind of take a walk, and it's really important to do. Find ways to have fun, because you need to be able to relax as well as dealing with heavy stuff.
So think about your partner as your best friend.
Yep.
Find time to do things together.
Right.
Don't be afraid to fight.
Right.
These are all good things, John.
Yeah, and then check in with each other emotionally. How are you doing? It's interesting how many partners in a relationship don't know what our partner's hopes and aspirations are in life, or what they want to do with their life, or where they're going in their life. People don't know each other. A lot of us are strangers to each other.
So there's where that risk of an affair gets to be a higher risk.
Because some affairee comes in and they promise them everything. Oh, you're just the best and you're most, fantastic.
I want to listen to all your
I want to
problems
listen.
and hear.
So, yeah.
We're already getting the wind-up sign soon.
Yeah.
I need to give people some websites. So if you would like to talk more with John or learn more about what he's doing, we have a couple resource pages. And let's see. I know we have your phone number.
Yep.
Can you tell it to me, because I don't have it written
You bet.
down?
It's 651-699-4573. Probably the best way to reach me.
The best way to reach
Leave
you.
a voicemail, then I'll call you back.
The Phoenix, the website for the Phoenix, we can access your articles
Yes, you
there.
can. Yeah, you
and
can.
it's www.thephoenixspirit.com.
Yeah.
I think that's it.
That's it.
And you brought a couple books,
Yeah.
and I want to show one of them here, and we'll give you a title for a couple others. A book called Love Sense by Sue Johnson, and it looks like an excellent book. I peeked at it before the taping, but can you just give us a thumbnail?
She's an excellent, she's a Canadian psychologist. I love this woman. She really helped co-found a school of progressive marital counseling called emotionally focused therapy. It's the hot thing today, and it really works really well because it goes more in depth, and it's very gentle and healing towards couples, especially couples that are really wounded. Because what she does is she gets people to work together, not against each other, but against their patterns. And she does it emotionally through encouraging each other.
Well, it looks like a great book.
It's a wonderful book.
She also wrote a book, and we are almost out of time, but I'll mention it, Hold Me Tight.
Yeah,
Great title. And then you said there's another very good book called Too Close for Comfort.
Yeah.
So write those titles down,
That's a
folks.
fun book because it looks at the unconscious patterns that we're not aware of.
So Too Close for Comfort, Hold Me Tight, and Love Sense.
Right.
Well, thank you, John.
Thank you so much.
For
It's always a
coming
pleasure.
down again.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure.
And helping us learn and value our relationships more.
Yeah.
Thank you, too, for being with us. I'll be back again next week. Until then, have a good week.